Hi, my name is Karen Holmes. I'm the founder and director of the World Peace Organization for the One World Government. Just like many people around the country, even around the world, I've been watching the impeachment trial, and today the House managers finished up their statements, and I wanted to comment tonight about let's say the frustration about everybody assuming that Donald Trump is going to be acquitted by the Republicans. I wanted to address that issue and compare it to something that happened to me several years ago. I'm interested in the Iraq War, and that's my project, one of them, and I was watching an appellate court case, and I was thinking that the attorney was making statements using his laws to win his case, and I was thinking you weren't making you weren't addressing what would convince the judges to agree with your side. And I feel the same way with this, and so I wanted to make a comment. The first one, I wrote my letter to the Supreme Court. I was ruminating over it, and I was frustrated about it, and so when I watched both the first impeachment trial and then this one, I felt that there was a better way to do it. The House managers have done an outstanding job coming up with their justifications, and the videos are terrifying, and as far as I'm concerned, they've made their case. They've convinced me. The only problem is that they're dealing with the Republicans, and this time period is very unique. This is not a normal trial, so they're not getting through to the Republicans, and that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. Is what I thought would be a better way to bring a case. What would you say to the Republicans to convince them to actually take this case seriously, and to have it a vote of conscience rather than something where they just seem to rubber stamp it? I know every person has his or her own idea, their own perspective on this, so I'm not making this a blanket statement, but I thought about what would I say if I were a House manager and tasked with the job of trying to convince them, let's say, break through the wall of resistance that is preventing the Republicans from actually convicting Donald Trump. I know that he is innocent until proven guilty, but like I said, the House managers have done a very good job at convincing me that he should be convicted, and also I can't imagine what the Donald Trump's attorneys would say to actually convince the Democrats the other way. So there's this big wide gulf. Now what I wanted to do is maybe bridge the gulf a little bit between the two sides, and come up with a way to explain this to maybe both sides. What would I say that would convince them? Okay, so the first idea is this time period is very unique, in that in 2003, when George W. Bush invaded Iraq with a preemptive strike, he collapsed the U.S. power base. When the power games that our government had been playing for many, many years to gain control of natural resources and strategic locations, it failed, it collapsed, it stopped working. with the Iraq War. And the reason was because he was innocent. Saddam Hussein was innocent. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And this collapsed the power base. The Republicans never understood that. They always thought that we have the biggest military, the best economy, or I don't know if that still exists, because other countries have big militaries and country and economies too. So under the circumstances, the Republicans are angry at the Democrats for undermining our power by the policies that they've come up with, like with Barack Obama, for example. And there's just this head-butting idea where when it collapsed our power base, then other world leaders decided to stand up and take their power games to the next level. Okay, now what happened though is it started to create a schism. It's divided the people up into 4 different segments. And you can see this if you really look, like the first 25% stand on principles. The second one is focused on power. The third is their lives are affected. And the fourth, function for their own interests. So when you think of that, you think of the Democrats always standing on principles. But when they do that, it threatens the security and support of the people who focus on money and power. And so these people go down into the power games. Then this affects the lives of this group, and then this group of people function for their own interests. So we're looking at when you divide people up into this group, this setting. This is called Armageddon. It means the silly things people do. There's like this separation where it occurs. It's separating people and dividing people up into these groups. And then you can see this with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton in 2016. The more principles he stood on, she went down into the power games. So we're looking at this idea. Then it affected the general Democrats, and then but it doesn't seem like it's divided up people quite as much as the Republicans have now, probably because of the power base. And also what they did then was the Republicans, you see people like Jeff Flake and John McCain, and those people have stood on principles. And then you have the people like Lindsey Graham and McConnell. They're always focused on power. Then you have the regular Republicans, and then you have the people like Steve Bannon, and actually Donald Trump fits into this group here. You can tell that they're functioning for their own interests because they're 180 degrees from where they think they are. These are the people who start rebellions. So having Donald Trump start a rebellion is a very logical thing to have happen. Okay. Now, on a parallel basis, you can look at this also like a family situation. Let's say the father stands on principles. He pegs the family at a certain level. The mother, is she going to be the kind of mother that will help the father, or is she going to cause problems? Is the marriage going to just kind of be like a childhood sweetheart kind of thing, and it's just going to kind of eventually fail? Okay, how about the children? So father, mother, and then the children, whose their lives are affected, like in a divorce. One stands on the principles, one is playing. If the husband is having an affair, for example, or working late and she's worried about it, and then the kids are affected, then what happens is then the people who function for their own interests are drawn in. So what's happening here with the Republicans and the Democrats and the independents, let's say the independents are the people whose lives are affected, what you have is the Republicans are working with somebody outside the family, the extended family, Donald Trump, he's not a real Republican. He doesn't focus on power and money, although he does he talks about money and power, except that that's not what he's focused on. He functions for his own interests. He's not focused on money and power, which is really a strange thing to say. But he's not part of the party. If he does something, he'll start his own party. And the thing of it is, though, is that there's 25% of the population here, and then the population, and this is why Donald Trump's approval rating never got above 50%, because he couldn't convince the independents and he couldn't convince the Democrats that he knew what he was doing. Okay, now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was if people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and the other Republicans who are looking at that 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump, and they're thinking about running for office in 4 years. You know, Joe Biden is pretty old to be president. You know, so chances are he's a one-term president. So the race, the presidential race, is going to be wide open at that point in time. But when you divide people up into these groups like this, you can't. Once it separates, it's going to come down to the individual level, and we have this idea that functioning for your own interests, why would anybody vote for somebody who's actually functioning for their own interests? Once everything comes out about Donald Trump, you know, like the first impeachment, okay? So with Russia and the connections with Russia and all those ideas, Donald Trump is not, he's a businessman who looks out for his own welfare, and he doesn't concern himself with anybody else. So now, if you take Ted Cruz and you take Josh Hawley, and they're going to be running for president of the United States, how are they going to do that under the circumstances when everybody is separated over and over and over and over again, and down to the individual level? The election process is going to be changing between now and then, because nobody's ever going to get above like 25%. They're never going to be able to convince any Democrats. They're never going to be able to convince any independents. So this is going to be a wide open race. So there's going to be changes in the election process. And the thing is, now, what happened is when the plan for the international government was introduced, the Democrats were going, this makes sense, we can do this makes sense, we don't have to worry about our economy, it's going to solve all these problems, we don't have to worry about this, we can withdraw our troops, and we can settle disputes in court rather than the battlefield, saving a lot of lives. We've got a plan. We've got a real good plan. But the Republicans said, we don't want to let go of our power base. Now, what I'm going to suggest here is, as a solution, is the World Peace Marketing Strategy. You probably can't see it. It's backwards. I didn't flip the picture. So it's the World Peace Marketing Strategy, and this is on my website at oneworldgov.org. I can put the link in the bottom. What it is that we have, this is what everybody wants. It gives people what they want. It's like the people and the standing on the principles go across the top row. The people who are focused on power and money, and they're our second row, they don't have to work with Donald Trump. Basically, the independents can go on this row. It doesn't really matter which row you're on. It's just, you can do them all if you want to. But then the people who function for their own interests are down in this lower row. And people who are in the lower row who function for their own interests are the ones who are creating waves. I have this diagram too, where they're creating waves, ripples of effects that keep on going out. This is our light source invention idea. And the principles, 7 principles, are what bring the back. So now, if you're standing on the principles of this, then these 7 principles, then you create a sense of balance again. But now, imagine then that if you're focused on Donald Trump, who's going to make America great again, what do you think would happen if you realize that you were responsible for your own financial support? Your own financial support, you can't depend on somebody else to give it to you. If you're depending on Donald Trump, who functions for his own interests, he never really was going to help you in the first place. He was just going to convince you to vote for him and to support him. So if he's 180 degrees from where he thinks he is, like holding on to Vladimir Putin, the Russian intelligence instead of U.S. intelligence, then because logically it would make sense that Vladimir Putin was offering him stuff that would help him, and the U.S. government was not going along with his plan. Wouldn't it make sense that he'd be backwards? Okay, but Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz running for president of the United States, this one starts out, this row is for people to assume responsibility for their own financial support, their own prosperity. And so this group here is for the independents, but this group is for the Republicans, and having to be responsible for their own actions is back on your shoulders. Okay, so the first one is the faith of the puree, and then it goes right down the list here, the California Community Property Law, which is the same idea, where the women are the trophy wives are dependent on their looks, and when they get older they lose their looks and they go down into this fear, the sense of fear. So now these ideas, these project ideas, Catholic Church in America, and that has to do with it's like each of the religions up here. We don't have to go into that. We can go into that more. But this one right here, Hinduism and security issues, have to do with becoming the president of the United States. For heaven's sakes. So for Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, they have to go, this is the row that they should go on, is if they want to become president of the United States, this is how it's going to happen right here. And then you will see that has to do with dealing with this lower group of people here. And then the last project that you focus on, it's the international government based on fair and equitable practices. So the Republicans were pushing away the idea, have been pushing away the idea of the international government, and now they're going to have to embrace the idea for them to assume responsibility for their own actions, because they're dealing with these last 3 groups, President of the United States, and then dealing with the people who function for their own interests, the narcissists, the sociopaths, the psychopaths. That's where this is all about. And then the final one is the international government, focusing on that idea of the benefits of equality and power. Okay, where true power comes from. That's assuming responsibility, sharing the power equally, and the power a government has is from the people. And it also guarantees unalienable rights. Excuse me a minute. Now, what we recommend our government do over the next 4 years is start to address the new election process. And instead of we're looking for an Article 5 Amendment Convention, and then instead of having the Electoral College and dealing with term limits and balanced budget and all the different things that have been the problems, the glitches that are in our system, and people come up with ideas, then that can be resolved when we do this Article 5 and lump them together as if we're taking it to the next level, letting go of the things we don't like and holding on to the things that we do like. And with the election process, the one thing Donald Trump did is he demonstrated that anybody can become president of the United States. but instead of somebody who functions for his own interests and is basically been caught in so many lies, over 30,000 lies. Basically what we have is someone where on a local level people can run for president of the United States, and then if they can solve the problems in a small town or any town, then basically they can solve problems. Then on each level, like at the statewide level, they can go onto the statewide level, and it's not based on contributions. It can be based on debates and things like that, where it doesn't cost them the money, like the newspapers, the media can do articles and such, cover that, and can do it for nothing. Basically, they don't have to do that. It's just a public service that they're offering. Then they don't have to be beholden to anybody either, and anybody can run for president as long as they can solve the problems. They don't sell their souls at that point in time. Then they go on to a regional level and have to solve problems, demonstrate how to solve problems on every level, and then imagine having the presidential candidates running for office introducing economic stimulus plans or solving each problem, like a local crisis like homelessness, and then a statewide level situation like transportation issues or things like that. And then the next one would be regional. What would be a regional issue? Maybe climate change and forest fires and things like that. And then a national level, and then the international government too. So I would say that if Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley want to become president of the United States, and they've glommed onto that 74 million voters that voted for Trump, I would say that over the next 4 years, they're going to have to rethink their strategy if they're going to become president of the United States. So, if Donald Trump is functioning for his own interests, the fourth row is for him, and that has to do with addressing the fact that if he's making waves like that, these waves here, based on the power games that lead to war, genocide, massacre, slavery, poverty, famine, and terrorism, the last step is terrorism. We are one step away from becoming a failed state at this point in time, just like Yemen. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this more, but I don't know if this would convince the Republicans to convict Donald Trump or not. But I have a feeling that if I was Republican and somebody told me that he's just functioning for his own interests, and that you're responsible for your own financial support, I might listen to that because this is my warehouse, and I have assumed responsibility for my own financial support too. The people who stand on the principles generally get let's say, pushed out of the family in a way, or a lot of times it's very difficult for them when everybody comes together and like the father is pushed out of the family. And so that's basically where it is. The people who stand on the principles also have to get their financial foundation back too. So, and that's something that we'll talk about later when I talk about the global renaissance. Okay, so that's enough for tonight. I ask you to like, share, and subscribe, and most of all, share this information with other people in your family and your friends, and talk about it and join the debate, because that's the most important thing right now for everybody. So, good night.